I can take anything in the universe and convert it into something that this model can understand to generate a unique piece of music at that moment in time that is literally unique and has never existed before in the universe.
That's awesome.
And with the tool, you can start like building the sounds that you need for that to express that. So even if you don't have the musical terms, you have the vision, you have the intent, you have the vibe, and you can use that. These models help you express that in musical terms.
I feel like this hopefully will be sort of like the nano banana moment for people around music. Hey everyone, welcome back to Release Notes. My name is Logan Kilpatrick. I'm on the Google DeepMind team. Today we're talking about Lyria 3. I'm joined by Myriam, Jeff, and Jason, and we're talking about, the new model available, all the product services that it's coming out to. But actually, what is Lyria for folks who don't know what the model is?
Lyria is our name for our music model. So it generates music. Now, what are the inputs into that model? We have text, we have image. We'll also have other ways that you can configure it. But you're providing it with inputs to give it some artistic and creative direction, and it outputs high quality sound, audio, music that you can then craft how you want. That's effectively what it is. I like to think of it as an instrument.
I love that. How should folks think about if you've never used a music model before, which I assume most people haven't interacted with a music model, what's the mental model or the framing, or maybe they should just go try it and experience it for themselves. But do you have a quick description or explanation of what people would expect from one of these models?
I'm a musician at heart, and so I generally just think of this as a new type of instrument. There's a lot of technical, details here and nuances and complexities, but it is ultimately something that you're trying to use to make some sounds and express something in the way that you want. And there's many different ways to shape it and try to configure it and do all these things, and you actually do get better at it over time, much like practicing an instrument. You also learn the nuances and how to kind of steer it in ways that are kind of unique, right? And you ultimately want to make it, make things that are in your style, right? And your likes that represent what you want to express. And so in that way, it's really like an instrument that you can play with, but also practice, right? And perform with. Yeah.
I love that.
One of the things that we have learned a lot is that there are many people that have something to say or something that they want to express. And sometimes it's just starting with that in mind. So what is it that I'm trying to do, or how am I feeling? Or I want to do something for my family, like a video expressing how much fun we have over Christmas. And with the tool, you can start building the sounds that you need for that to express that. So even if you don't have the musical terms, you have the vision, you have the intent, you have the vibe, and you can use that. These models help you express that in musical terms.
To kind of double down on the idea of this as an instrument, I worked on image generation for years. And one of the things as a person who had worked on language, as a natural language processing researcher, is I really wanted to connect language to vision and have there be a tight connection between, you said you want this, this, and that with these properties in your image, and then you see it come out in the image. That's a really powerful thing, and I think we really nailed that with Imagine 3 and then later on with Nano Banana. And so with Lyria 3, a lot of what our effort was let's really work on getting really rich captions that would go into to build the connection between the way you're describing music and the actual music that comes out. And then what you get is this really nice generalization where you can start to really morph the language in order to morph the model's response to that. And then you get these really fine-grained kinds of details that you can express to the model, and the model will kind of follow these contours. And so we give a very long context of prompting ability to this model. So I'm really excited about seeing what people come up with a model that's going to really be able to be like clay that you can mold across the whole song.
I like to kind of mess with the model by putting in strange punctuation or emojis. I develop these and get it to react or respond in different ways. Sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes awesomely. Yeah, it's kind of fun. What kind of music do you listen to?
Pop music, honestly, probably. Whatever, literally top 50 pop is the music that I listen to. So yeah, nothing good. Or good stuff, but yeah.
What's something recently that you listened to that kind of caught your ear?
That's a good question. Honestly, I don't I have a playlist from 5 years ago and I just re-listen to the same old songs, but I honestly don't listen to music that much, which is why this is interesting to me, because thankfully I don't commute right now. So I feel like that would historically been the thing. And I listen to podcasts when I work out, which had been the other thing where I historically listen to music. So Yeah, this will be it'll be fun to spend more time with Lyria.
Maybe this will broaden your horizons.
Brings me back. Yeah, I felt this way.
I've actually discovered some really cool music and some really good producers from listening to podcast intro sequences.
Interesting.
Yeah. Jason, what about you? What do you listen to?
I listen to almost everything. Like I listen obsessively. My dad was a rock and roll pianist in Michigan in the 1970s and 80s. So I grew up with music around. My son plays classical guitar. And so, and I basically like to make this clear, like my younger brother, Justin, and I, every year we select our 100 favorite tracks that we listen to that year. So that usually is me paring it down from 800 songs from the thousands I listen to every year. So for me, like working on this music model was like tremendously fun because like I love so many different genres, and I was like, yes, like let's go here, let's go there, and like let's see if the model can do this. So it's been really exciting for me in that regard as a music lover.
That's awesome. Jeff, we also, I don't know, you've got to plug your own music in this. How do people find your music? I didn't even know that you produce music and put it out there. Where do I find it?
JC++, which is obviously a computer science reference as well.
I like it.
I'm on YouTube, my musical journey, and you all know this is a dream job of mine, right? But I grew up playing piano, clarinet, and bass guitar. When I was in my teens, I listened to a lot of alternative rock into my 20s as well. But then I got really into electronic music, going to a lot of shows and festivals. And so in my 30s, I, dove even deeper into it and started learning how to produce. And so I learned Ableton, and I make house music, and I still try to find time every single morning to just sit down in the DAW and just start crafting sounds and styles that I like, right? And that's ultimately what brings me joy.
Love that. Myriam, what about you?
I went to music school when I was little, studied piano and classical music for years, but I was more of a performer. So I did ballet and dancing and singing, a lot of singing. So for me, this project has been bringing back amazing memories and making me re-engage with my musical side that I had sort of like left behind. So it's very exciting. I listen more to like EDM, type of like chill EDM.
Yeah.
It's my commute music. So it keeps me going. I've started to produce a little bit more these days. Again, like reconnecting with my musical side. But I love everything. I love dancing. So anything that you throw at me, I will probably dance it.
Myriam, maybe we go and look at some examples of Lyria 3 and we can listen to some music and just hang out.
I pre-generated a few examples and we can add more. But basically on the Gemini app, now we're enabling Lyria 3 and you can provide a prompt as big as you want, but also as detailed as you want with any sort of structure, what you're expecting to change, and it will do the generation for you. So in this example, we are generating an instrumental funk jam, and there is a lot of detail here if I expand on everything that we introduced in terms of the instrumentation and everything. And let's just play it.
Myriam, really quick, in this example, like obviously you, like for somebody who doesn't make music, like I don't know if I'd have the terms to describe in this prompt, like, and maybe we can see some other examples after this, but like how flexible is the model if you're not like able to really articulate, if I can't prompt, if I don't have the prompt engineering skills yet for Lyria 3?
Absolutely. I mean, there are many different ways to do it. I would use Gemini also to help me create a prompt. So sometimes it's just about, I'm advising the intent, what I'm trying to do, or I just say a genre and I iterate with Gemini until I get a prompt that I really like, and I will try that. So that's another way to do. And it helps you build knowledge in terms of like musical terms. So it's actually really, really helpful.
Nice.
There's musical terms, but there's also just artistic or aesthetic or creative terms, right? You can describe moods, you can describe emotions using words, obviously.
I feel like that's what I can do.
And you can do that. You can do that in as eloquent or non-eloquent as a way as you want. And of course, you can continue playing with that.
Yeah. I love it.
But we definitely give help, just as we do with Imagine and VO and all these things. Like you just say, like, I want a cat, I want a video of a guy jumping into a lake, and I want a funky jam. Like we have things that underlying will talk to the model and really bring out the richness and detail.
Very cool. All right, let's listen to the first song. Like we need cool studio headphones.
Yes, exactly.
In terms of really getting the stereo with like headphones really helps.
Yeah. And so Myriam, does this do like multi-turn editing as well? If I wanted to like say, take this song and riff on it?
With limitations, you can do some edits and continue the conversation. And it may suggest different directions as well. So sometimes it's better that you prompt from scratch with the new prompt that it's giving you.
Nice. Well, that was cool.
Yeah, one thing to point out, as I was listening, I really appreciated how it really got some of the instrumentation around, the different like piano, this and that. But it's funny because you can always get better, right? And because I know for some of our examples, we've played it for the team. One of our teammates is a professional drummer, and he'll be like, "Oh, that snare sounded a little off," or like, "There's too many types of snare drums in that click. It's like it's not a real drum, a real drum set only has one or two or whatever." But at the same time, maybe you do want to create something where, like, a theoretical alien with 8 arms is playing a bunch of snares, right? And so there's interesting things you can always think about there. But yeah, there's always things we can do better. You mentioned multi-turn editing.
Yeah,
we're absolutely going to invest in being able to like do that repeatedly and at a super granular level, so you can even focus on specific sonic elements. Of course, you want to be able to separate out different instruments, but ideally in the long term, you want to be able to like replace a certain instrument with a certain other one, and you want to condition it so that what that instrument does is literally accompanying what another instrument does, and like figuring that out in the time dimension as well. So there's still so much work. We're only just barely scratching the surface of what's possible here, and we're really looking forward to making this even more advanced for everyone.
I love that. And this Lyria 3 does support lyrics in songs as well. Cool. Do we have any cool, interesting demos of lyrics? I'm curious how natural it feels.
I can generate some, or I can bring one of my previously saved ones.
Yeah. Happy to listen.
Yep.
I like this.
It's one of my favorites.
Lights on the glass, they're starting to blur. Chasing a ghost, so I thought of a sir. Pedal to floor, but the heart's moving slow. Nowhere to be and nowhere to go. Just the hum of the tires on the wet pavement. Finding the peace in a temporary arrangement. City is breathing, I'm holding my breath. Dancing with silence, avoiding the rest. Neon reflections on the dash. Life moves on in a purple flash. We're just two heartbeats in the night, wrapped in the glow of
So vocals and singing are obviously
very
critical
good.
to music. It's a very critical element there. And one thing we've obviously worked on is trying to like avoid the uncanny valley and like make sure that it sounds expressive and natural.
Yeah.
And there's always more work to be done on that front, but I'm really happy with the progress so far. But then kind of harkening back to the previous conversation about the alien playing drums or whatever, sometimes you ultimately want maximum control, right? And so maybe you do want something that sounds very auto-tuned. Maybe you do want something that sounds not auto-tuned at all and is quite pitchy. Maybe you do want something with tons of reverb and tons of kind of breath noises, and maybe you just want something that's super clean, and so ultimately we want to provide that flexibility for people to choose how to make their music, right? If you listen to some of the music that I make, it's like intentionally very robotic sounding voices, because that's just kind of the vibe I'm going for.
That's awesome. Well, and in this song that we were just listening to, what got us to that?
So I actually had a very simple prompt for this one. It was pop, rap, fusion, melodic hooks, atmospheric production, late night urban vibes, and I iterated until I got a result that I liked. Because originally it gave me male vocals, and I want a female vocal. And I wanted some harmonies. I wanted some like voices in the background. So I managed to iterate a little bit until I got a sample that it resonated with me, and it sparked this is the thing that I would love to like right now listen to while I'm working on emails at night.
Yeah. Is this a good example of like the controllability that you see with Lyria 3? Like, could you actually, like in this example, you're not giving like who you want to be singing, but like you said like you sort of did it multi-turn. Could you have just said like I want a woman to be singing this, or
Yeah.
like that type of voice.
I could have
And it would-
provided that level of detail at the point that I started creating some of the songs. I didn't have that intent. It was only until I started listening and iterating on. So it gave me, I could work with Gemini and with the music until I got something that really resonated with what I was after.
And that's the key thing about making music, right? You
Yeah.
kind of figure out what you want as you go along, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
by making the music, you start to craft it, you iterate on it until you can get something you're happy with. But that's part of the process. It's part of the magic.
And then you have a co-creation process,
Yeah.
which is far
Exactly.
better than just one thing out and then you get a result and then you're done. Now you can actually iterate on the idea and kind of just be aspiring and playing.
Yeah. How should folks think just at the macro level about the levels of controls? And I think actually this is maybe somewhat product dependent as well. We can start with like at the model level, and then is there any nuance at like across the product spectrum of those controls?
We want the model to be as powerful as possible,
Yeah.
right? And then across the products, you have a range of, musical expertise and knowledge and a range of technical expertise and knowledge.
Yeah.
And the great thing is we can meet the users where they're at and then help them grow or help them learn, right? And so when it comes to the most advanced users and the most technical users that want to configure everything and have super maximum control, we want to give that ability. And those by definition won't be a mass market consumer product, but right. But that's why we've been working with our partners and with the industry and with specific artists as we build these models, because we want that feedback to get to that level of quality and control. And so, ultimately you can think of it in two dimensions. One dimension is sound, right? The different instruments, the different frequencies, the different, layers of the song or sample you're making, and time, right? You want to be able to control when and where that happens and the flow of things, right? And so that's something we'll always be working on.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about this launch because I think we're going to learn a lot from people that haven't had this sort of like musical journey.
Yeah.
But this may spark a musical journey or a different entry point where music is part of that. And I think that's beautiful. Not a lot of people know that they have something to express until they have the tools and instruments to do it. And we're trying to facilitate that. So I'm very, very excited about the learnings and how we can do more of that.
Yeah. I have played around with the previous Lyria models and like other AI music tools that are out there. And like, I feel like this hopefully will be sort of like the nano banana moment for people around music. It feels like with how broadly accessible the model is going to be, hopefully more people will experience that and like go down that journey.
Leading up to today, like so many people have been coming to us like excited about it, trying it out for themselves more so than before.
Yeah. Jeff, I was reflecting real time as you asked me about the music I like, and I feel like something is, and I'm curious, you three probably felt this and thought about it more than I have, but there's this emotionalness visceral emotionness that you feel from music that like you actually don't feel in a lot of other things, or at least I don't feel. And I've also, as someone who can't, who's not musically inclined enough to sort of express the details of that, I'm curious how you all think about like these tools and these models will, like, I don't know, the relationship between those things from Lyria and like how people will be able to feel that stuff.
Not to get too philosophical or woo-woo here, but I've always felt like music is special. I think psychologically or even physiologically, if you look at how the brain works and everything, back from the early prehistoric humans with bone flutes and banging drums and using their voices, and just, it's a very personal thing, but it's also a very communal thing, right? Some of the peak moments in my life have been centered around a particular song or a particular chord progression or a particular, gathering, we speak with so many different tongues, but like you go to a concert and like it doesn't matter where you're from, like music brings people together. And so whether you're using a bone flute or you're using Ableton Live or you're using, a model or tweaking all of them in combination with each other, like being able to express something that any other person or animal honestly can hear and emotionally react to, that's like super duper special. I just think it's magical.
And I use music to regulate my moods, to give me energy for different kinds of things. When I was working on my dissertation, there's a set of like trip hop and drum and bass albums that I listen to. So when I go back to writing code, I put those on and I'm back in it. If I'm writing a paper, I listen to Miles Davis and other things like that, or I have Brian Eno. And these just allow me to slot right into that mental and emotional state I need to do that kind of work.
I love that. Obviously, like the model's available for everyone. Any advice for people who are like going and experimenting with Lyria and like trying to build a product around it?
Yeah, I've had people come to me and like, oh, what if you make this thing that analyzes this image and takes this other thing and combines it with the volcanoes erupting over there and converts that into a formula and then makes a song or makes a track or makes a soundtrack based on that. And I'm like, that's awesome. You should go build it. The sky's the limit. Like, I'm really looking forward to seeing what people come up with. Is like, I can take anything in the universe and convert it into something that this model can understand to generate a unique piece of music at that moment in time that is literally unique and has never existed before in the universe. So again, I'm getting so like philosophical, but I think it's just super cool.
Yeah.
That is cool.
I would love to invite the community to think about what education use cases you could build with this technology. How do you help children to understand music in different sort of dimensions and levels when you may not have the right tools at your disposal, or maybe your school can't fund instruments. Also in the health space, I'm pretty sure there are plenty of things that we could do with some of this technology to help even train like music therapists that, do amazing job for people. So I would love to invite the community to like just start. We make it available to you so we can build some amazing stuff to help others.
I love that. We had Lyria real time in AI Studio, and I feel like it's been my go-to, just like playing around with it. I love putting in the prompt and changing the bars, and I forgot what the name of that example is that we have, but it's cool, and I feel like there's lots of interesting experiences. And I've actually found myself like trying to remix that into other like music actually became something that I had at my disposal as somebody who wanted to build something, which historically it hadn't been before we did that. And I feel like this is going to take it even farther. I know that there's a small but hopefully growing and hardcore audience of Lyria real-time fans. So for folks who have played around with that experience, is that something they should think about, or like how to think about the difference between real-time and song generation?
We're absolutely continuing to work on that model as well. And so the real-time model is generating music on the fly. So think of it as a soundscape that you're sculpting as it's coming out. And the cool thing about that is these work together, right? Because as music is being generated, you can always go back after the fact and try to edit it. And, so I actually think, real-time, non-real-time, these all are part of the bigger picture of like making music, editing music, producing music, performing music. It's all part of that spectrum.
If we were to boil down to like just a raw audio capability, like what actually would make Lyria different from, we have like speech generation models as an example. I'm sure you and others have like, you can do some like weird things where like, you can not actually get music, but like you could kind of coerce the model into doing some of those odd things. I'm curious actually if there's any like interesting edges or like interplay between some of the other models in the model families that we have.
Yeah, I mean, you can, I don't know, this is exactly what you're asking for, but you can have speech happening in the song, right? And so you can prompt for speech, and then the model will speak through these things. You can prompt for train sounds and things like that. And it doesn't always come across with the train sounds yet, we're working on that.
Yeah.
But it can sometimes lead to really interesting music. Like, one time I put a prompt in, it's like a man with a really dry voice is singing as though he's a cracked kiln, longing for something, blah, blah, blah. And then you end up with this really interesting kind of unique sound. And so the fact that like we're mediating all this stuff via language does get these really weird, interesting mashups in the model itself. But, maybe back to your point, as you start to merge in speech data with music data and diegetic sounds, like the kinds of sounds that you just kind of hear around you and so on, you could maybe really create interesting new sonic landscapes that are the kind of experimental variety that, and it really gets you back to what people like Brian Eno and others were doing in the 70s, playing around with new synthesizers and like various like just ambient sounds and so on. I'm hoping we'll see some cool stuff.
Yeah, sonic landscapes is a much more ambitious way of framing where my head was at, but I think it's actually a good example of like, there's like really subtle background sort of, we'd consider like background music in a movie, which like, maybe there's not actually someone singing and there's kind of, there's ambiance, but maybe there's like, I don't know, like more sound effects also in there. So I'm curious if that's something that is like sound effects as like a use case and something that works well.
Yeah, I mean, on the whole, like across the teams, we're all thinking about these things, right? And if you think about it, like the difference between speech and rapping and singing, or Foley and sound effects, or noise, or music, sounds versus music. These are all just labels that like we as a society or humans have put on things, right? But it's a spectrum, right? And many of these things, all of these things can be combined in different permutations to make art, right? And so that's ultimately our goal, to empower people to make that art.
Jeff, you have some interesting music that you made with
Yeah. Here's one that I made recently. I won't try to preface it by describing it, but yeah, let's just play it. It's one of my favorites so far, just because I like it. Yeah.
Jeff, you got to give context on this. And I feel like something we were talking off camera, something that would help me for these songs is now like actually visualizing like instrumentally what's happening, because I'm having it like, this song is actually a good example where I'm like having a hard time wrapping my head around like what even would be happening.
Totally. And for me, I hear the bass guitar, I'm like, oh, I wish I could play that well. And I hear the drums and the different things going on. But yeah, it'd be awesome. You could vibe code an app or something that basically shows the spatial arrangement of these different instruments, what they typically do look like. And the saxophone comes in over here, yeah.
What intrigued you, and also like why? What were you trying to capture by?
Yeah, I was trying to capture some notion of unexpectedness. There's definitely some improvisatory elements there. And I just wanted to make something that sounded like an increasing kind of crescendo of energy in a somewhat kind of like, the excitement you get right before you hit the launch button, right?
Yeah. And were you like letting the model drive the sort of unexpectedness, or was that something where like you were sort of, dictating what unexpectedness meant in that context?
I didn't dictate what unexpected meant. I specified instruments. I did say a timestamp roughly around where I wanted that to crescendo or increase, but otherwise a lot of it was just playing, letting it play with itself. Yeah. And honestly, I forgot to mention, but I'm also in like a little alt rock, punk rock band with some friends in Brooklyn. And so like, now I'm like, wait, I want to take that and like, turn it into tabs or sheet music and then like play that live, physically. Cause like, it just sounds fun to jam,
Do you think artists or just everyday people will like have this type of like AI tool as a physical instrument that they're like working with? Cause I imagine like, it might be weird if you're like, with your band and then you like whip out a laptop or something like that. Like, I don't know. It just seems,
tapping the guitar. No,
yeah.
That's the magical thing about computers, man. Like, just figure out some way to get the inputs and the outputs out, and you can come up with the form factors you want. You can optimize for the latency or the sound or the whatever requirements that you want, right?
Cool. Let's talk really quickly about evals. I feel like, and also if there's like anything interesting in like how this sort of story has evolved from Lyria to Lyria 2 to even the real time to now Lyria 3 of like, what are we actually hill climbing on? Is it just like taste of, you all are vibing and listening, you're getting paid to decide what music sounds good and what music doesn't, or what's the, how are we hill climbing?
Some of the very initial evals, certainly, but no, not at scale. And evaluations, yeah. So, I mean, you pointed out, music is about tastes, right? So what counts as good music versus bad music? But ultimately, we want to respect the user's intent with what they are trying to create, right? But also when it comes to having human beings listen and give feedback on what the model is creating, we intentionally went and got a very broad range of people, including people with a lot of musical expertise, right? because you want to be able to catch the details on all those things. And so, yeah, I mean, it's probably pretty obvious to state, but the more the better, and the broader and more expert, the better. Yeah.
And I don't know how granular you want to get with this, but we actually followed a lot of the same approach that we did with Imagine and VO, where you end up with sort of what we have as our vibe prompt sets. And as the modeling team, you just know these prompts, like you know what that image should look like, you know what that video should look like, or you know what that song should sound like, or you know what the past attempts were. And so you build a mental model for a small set of prompts, and then you know when you're hearing certain things happening, like, oh, the harp actually came in on this track, like for the first time. And then that happened on one of the like really hard prompts that I had. I was like, okay, cool, this is actually happening now. Or you're looking for like, you know, singing virtuosity and various things like that. So there are some things where no matter what genres you like or don't like, you can still assess the musical quality as a team. But then once you've kind of got to a point where you think, well, all right, this checkpoint seems pretty good, let's fire it off to our human evals. And then we have general pools, we have music expert pools, and so on. And we run a lot of those.
We look across many dimensions from like the prompt adherence. Is this following what I instructed it to do? But also musicality wise, from the vocals, from the quality, fidelity. And as we mentioned, we look at like various pools, but basically we're just trying to make sure that we have a good understanding on what the gaps are so we can get better at those. And sometimes it's looking at what distribution do we have in one checkpoint versus others, and we keep hearing. What is fantastic as well is the partnerships that we have internally across Google to help us kind of like listen, because you can look at an image and say I like it or I don't like it, but when you listen into music sample, you need to listen to the whole thing and then be very diligent to like, this I liked, this didn't quite fit, and make sure that it has some consistency. So there is a lot of effort, a number of hours into listening to the songs and the evals, and it's a beautiful task just to see us on the desk, like, but also like with the rest of the pools that we work with.
And I was going to say, there is something very beautiful about the fact that for music, you can't shortcut it. You can't rush it. You got to actually listen to it. You can't just like speed it up, right?
Yeah. What comes next for Lyria? I feel like obviously folks will experience the model. Hopefully many more people will sort of, including myself, figure out, you know, become more in tune with music. And I'm sure we'll get tons of feedback, and there's a million things that we already know we want to do that the models will sort of need to get better at and evolve into. But I'm curious for all three of you, actually, like what's top of mind going into the future as this model sees the light of day?
I think just as we saw with Nano Banana, where image generation turns into image editing and modification and having many more ways of controlling the model and the kinds of outputs you're getting, I think that kind of editing and generation for music is where we're going.
Yeah.
We really want to be able to, and then what we're talking about with the model as an instrument becomes even more accessible to people, musicians, and so on, because now I can bring that, like I can, you know, jam on the guitar a bit, and then I can bring that as a context, and I say, okay, well, I want a backing drum beat, but you know, I need, you know, these lyrics to hit in at this point, and then the song will weave it, the model will weave that together. So that's definitely where we're heading.
Yeah.
I love that.
Ultimately, it's about maximum control and granularity and layered composition, both sonically in sound and temporally in time, right? And just giving that maximum control so people can, you know, make what they want. And in terms of user experience, like having something that is as natural and intuitive as the conversation we're having right now, right?
So it's really like an AI-first way to work with these models. DAWs are amazing, the digital audio workstations, but they require a ton of expertise. I mean, Jeff knows how to do it. I don't have that expertise, but once you kind of do that, you have that accessibility of people to be able to work using language, using audio references, using visual references, and so on to shape the sounds that they're interested in hearing them.
That's awesome.
That was going to be my point, that the empowerment that you get through any starting point, being an image or being your own lyrics, you're writing something and you just want to use that to start creating something. So,
you know, when it comes to thinking about music and referencing music and coming up with the right words to describe the music you want to create or hear, I think it's good for people to like sometimes we like draw this line between artists and us. And it's like, oh, we're all artists, right? So let's all work together and let's all create cool things together. And we don't have to rely on naming some concrete thing that's like in a box over here or whatever, right? It's like we're developing the vocabulary to describe the music we want to make and listen to.
Yeah. I feel like that would be very helpful from like because I feel like I certainly don't have that vocabulary, and I feel like there's lots of people who don't have it. So I think it'll be interesting to see like how these product experiences can like actually help people sort of like work towards building the vocabulary to actually be able to describe what they want. And we had a conversation with the Genie 3 team, and a thread of that conversation was like Genie 3 prompt engineering is back. Just because like, it feels like we're in that era of the model story, and maybe that's less true for Lyria 3, where like you could just vaguely describe what you want and the model will figure it all out. But it does feel like there's like a real edge in being able to articulate exactly what you want and the way you want it, and specifically in like the musical context, being able to do that feels very interesting for this model.
I think there's always going to be a raising of the bar, right? And you can always get better at it. And there'll be people that are motivated to spend the time and build expertise to get better at it. And that's great. That's working as intended, right? I think hopefully more people will try it out and dip their toes in. Hopefully some people will decide to go even further. Maybe some people will decide to be professional producers or artists. And then, we go from there, right? And so I think it's always great to like have something that you can get better at.
Yeah. As we're developing it, I often told the team I want the model to be weirdable. So it's like actually able to be weird.
Yeah.
And that's one of the fun things when you have that kind of control we've been talking about, where you can press and prod and like use weird turns, and then you actually get different kinds of sounds to come out. And that's, I think, just an amazing way to prod these kind of capabilities. And
I
it's
love
definitely a weird model.
Make music weird. I love it. That's
Keep music weird.
Yeah, keep music weird. That's a good one. Myriam, Jeff, Jason, this was awesome. I'm super excited for folks to get their hands on Lyria 3. I'm super excited to see all the cool and interesting music. I'll start listening to your music, Jeff. I'm excited. We'll get you one more follower on YouTube to tune in and listen. Thanks everyone for tuning into this episode, and we'll see you in the next episode.